Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something that will sting, but it is the truth. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your excuses. Nobody cares about your story of why you couldn't. Nobody cares about your pain as much as you think they do. The world is not waiting to hand you a medal for trying. The world rewards results, not intentions. That may sound harsh, but the brain, biology, and society itself all work in that exact way. And the sooner you understand that truth, the faster you'll liberate yourself from the prison of self-pity and start operating at the level where true change and achievement happen. I want you to imagine this. Two people wake up tomorrow morning. One has been dealt every disadvantage you can think of: poverty, poor education, no connections, health problems. The other has had every advantage: wealth, private tutors, supportive parents, opportunities thrown at them since birth. Who do you bet on to succeed? Your gut might tell you the privileged one, but neuroscience and psychology teach us something fascinating. The human brain is a learning machine designed to adapt, designed to grow under pressure, and often it is the one who is forced to struggle, to claw, to fight, who develops the mental muscle required to achieve extraordinary results. The privileged one may have the comfort, but the underdog often develops the grit. And that's the first lesson. Hard work reshapes the brain itself. Studies on neuroplasticity, our brain's ability to rewire itself, show that when you deliberately put yourself under challenge, under strain, your neurons fire differently. They form new connections, they create stronger pathways. In other words, stress plus effort literally rewires you to become smarter, faster, more resilient. When you lean into the difficulty, your brain thanks you by becoming more capable. But if you retreat into excuses, into comfort, into a try tomorrow, your brain also adapts. It adapts downward. It learns laziness. It learns helplessness. Nobody cares about your background because biology has already given you a built-in chance at transformation, your ability to adapt. And the only thing that activates that gift is relentless, consistent, uncompromising effort. Work harder. Let me tell you about a man named Wilma Rudolph's doctor. He told her as a child, "You'll never walk again." She had polio, braces on her legs. Society had already written her off, but she and her mother refused to accept that verdict. She worked, and when I say worked, I mean painful, endless, grinding effort, step by agonizing step. Years later, she not only walked, she ran, and then she sprinted into history, winning 3 Olympic gold medals in track and field. Now, if anyone had the right to say life isn't fair, I can't do it, it was her. But she chose the harder path. She chose to work harder when the world didn't care about her story of struggle. Nobody cares if you're tired. Nobody cares if you didn't sleep well last night. Nobody cares if you had a rough childhood. The world responds to output, to results, to execution. Think about it. When you step into a doctor's office, do you care how much sleep the surgeon got the night before your operation? Do you care whether he had an argument with his spouse that morning? No. You care if he performs the surgery successfully. You care about the outcome. And that's exactly how the world looks at you. Your results are the currency, not your excuses. Now here's where science adds another dimension to this truth. There's something called the effort paradox in psychology. People simultaneously want things to be easy, but they respect and value the things they had to work for. Easy things, things handed to us, lose their meaning quickly. The expensive watch gifted to you by your parents doesn't hold the same pride as the first watch you bought with your own earned money after years of grinding. The diploma you studied night and day for feels infinitely more valuable than a piece of paper handed out without effort. Our brains assign worth to effort. We're literally wired to value what we've bled for. That means if you're running away from effort, you're also running away from meaning. Let's look at another example from medicine. When patients go through physical rehabilitation after a severe injury, many of them reach a point where progress feels unbearably slow. Day after day, they move their limbs a few inches more. To them, it feels trivial. But when researchers scan their brains, they see monumental changes happening in the motor cortex. Tiny repetitions are rewiring entire circuits of the brain. And eventually, that slow grind adds up to miraculous recoveries. The truth is, what feels like nothing today compounds into transformation tomorrow. but only if you keep working, only if you refuse to quit. You see, one of the biggest lies people tell themselves is, if I explain my situation enough, someone will understand and give me a pass. But life is not a sympathetic parent. It doesn't hand out passes. Your boss, your clients, your competitors, your peers, they all care about one thing: what you deliver. The longer you waste breath trying to get someone to understand why you couldn't, the more time you steal from yourself that could have been spent producing, executing, delivering. Most successful people I've studied, whether in science, business, athletics, or art, share a common trait. They never confuse effort with results. They don't want applause for trying, they want victory for succeeding. And that hunger, that refusal to settle for "I tried," is what propels them into greatness. Now let's get brutally honest. Some of you sitting here today are addicted to sympathy. You like telling your story of why you can't. You like the nods of pity. You like the temporary comfort of someone saying, "It's okay, you had a rough time." But let me ask you, did that sympathy ever pay your bills? Did it build your dream? Did it change your family's future? Or did it simply make you feel warm for 5 minutes before you were right back where you started? Sympathy is a drug. It numbs you, but it never cures you. Hard work, relentless execution, that's the cure. The human body itself teaches us this lesson. Muscles don't grow unless you tear them. Endurance doesn't increase unless you push past fatigue. Strength doesn't rise unless you expose yourself to weight heavier than what you can currently handle. Growth is born from discomfort. Yet so many of us spend our lives running from discomfort, seeking shortcuts, pleading for someone to care enough to make it easier for us. And then we wonder why nothing changes. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I've seen too many brilliant minds waste away in the arms of excuses. People with potential that could have changed the world, but instead they became experts in explaining why it couldn't be done. I've also seen people with no obvious advantage. People broken, scarred, unprepared, who simply refuse to stop working. And those people carve their names into history. The world doesn't care if you had a bad day. It doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't care if you're scared. What it cares about is whether you show up, whether you do the work, whether you deliver. And the only way forward, the only way to earn respect, results, and freedom is to accept this truth fully. Nobody cares, work harder. Let's lean even deeper into this. If nobody cares, then what are you left with? Yourself, your choices, your habits, your execution. And that is far more empowering than it sounds, because once you stop waiting for someone to hand you understanding, once you stop waiting for the applause of others, you are free to focus purely on what matters: action. The people who achieve greatness aren't the ones who begged for compassion. They're the ones who took full ownership and said, "It's on me." Now let's talk about ownership in the language of neuroscience. In the brain, there is something called the locus of control. People with an external locus of control believe life happens to them. They blame fate, luck, circumstances, other people. They wait for the world to care. People with an internal locus of control believe life happens because of them. They take responsibility. They say, if it's to be, it's up to me. The fascinating part is that studies show people with an internal locus of control perform better academically, recover faster from setbacks, and even live longer. Why? Because their mindset drives them to action instead of helplessness. And action rewires the brain and body toward resilience. Think about Thomas Edison. He failed thousands of times before perfecting the light bulb. Do you think the world cared about those thousands of failures? Do you think society paused to give him comfort after each attempt? No. The world only cared when the light turned on. That's the nature of results. And yet Edison kept going. Why? Because he understood that nobody was coming to save him. He had to do the work. And his persistence reshaped the way all of humanity lives. Or take Michael Jordan. People remember the championships, the game-winning shots, the iconic moments. But what they don't remember is the endless hours of practice in empty gyms, the early mornings, the relentless obsession with working harder than everyone else. He once said, "I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Nobody cared about the misses. Nobody cared about the failures. What mattered was that he kept working until the wins overshadowed everything else. There's a principle in behavioral science called the hedonic treadmill. It explains why people adapt so quickly to comfort, success, and pleasure. You get a raise, and within weeks, it feels normal. You buy a new car, and in a month, it's just your car. The same brain wiring that adapts us to pain also adapts us to pleasure, which means if you rely on comfort, you'll always be chasing it. But if you rely on hard work, the very act of grinding, the very act of pushing becomes the reward itself. That's why so many high achievers actually crave challenge. They've trained their brains to find meaning in effort. Let me give you a medical example. In cardiology, when patients survive a heart attack, they're often given a choice: change your lifestyle or face the same risk again. Statistically, many of them fail to change. Why? Because it's hard, because it takes effort, because it means daily work, diet, exercise, discipline. But the ones who do change, who wake up every day and walk, who adjust their meals, who work at it relentlessly, often live not just longer, but healthier, fuller lives. Their effort becomes their salvation. The ones who wait for life to cut them a break, the ones who expect someone to care enough to carry them, they rarely make it. Hard truth, but truth nonetheless. So here's the question you must ask yourself every single day. Am I waiting for someone to care, or am I doing the work regardless? Because the results will always expose the answer. The great trap in modern culture is this idea that motivation is enough. People binge videos, they read quotes, they get inspired for 5 minutes, but motivation fades. Science tells us dopamine spikes when we anticipate reward. That's why we feel good about planning, about imagining success, but dopamine doesn't last without action. And if you never translate that inspiration into sweat, into discipline, into actual work, your brain learns to settle for fantasy instead of reality. That's why habits matter more than moods. Discipline outlasts motivation. Nobody cares if you feel like doing it. What matters is whether you do it. I've worked with people in recovery, people overcoming addiction. They often say, no one understands what I'm going through, and they're right. Nobody truly understands their exact pain. But those who recover don't recover because the world cared enough to save them. They recover because they built habits, daily routines, relentless accountability. They worked harder than their cravings, harder than their triggers. And that work, not sympathy, saved them. Think about war veterans who come back with trauma. Many of them face nightmares, depression, and the invisible wounds of battle. And while support systems are vital, the ones who climb back into life with strength are those who harness resilience through action. They exercise, they build businesses, they serve communities. They fight back every day because deep down they know the world doesn't pause for their trauma. Life keeps moving, and the only way to reclaim their future is to work harder than the shadows chasing them. Now let's talk about biology again. When you push yourself physically, when you run, when you lift, when you endure, your body releases endorphins, natural chemicals that reduce pain and elevate mood. But here's the catch. Those endorphins are only released after the effort. You can't think your way into them. You have to move, sweat, strain. It's nature's way of rewarding hard work. Even your own body doesn't care how much you complain. It only rewards effort. So the phrase, nobody cares, work harder, isn't cruelty. It's biology, it's psychology, it's reality. The world, your brain, your body, they're all built on the principle of cause and effect. Do the work, get the reward. Avoid the work, pay the price. And let's address the elephant in the room, fairness. Many people say it's not fair. Some people start ahead. You're right. Life is not fair. Some people are born richer, smarter, healthier, but fairness is irrelevant. What matters is, what are you going to do about it? Because history is filled with people who started behind and finished ahead. Fairness doesn't guarantee success, and unfairness doesn't guarantee failure. The differentiator is always work. There's a famous study in psychology called the marshmallow test. Children were given a marshmallow and told they could eat it immediately or wait and receive 2 later. Decades of follow-up showed the kids who could delay gratification, the ones who could resist the easy path, ended up with higher achievements in life. Why? Because they learned the value of patience, discipline, hard work. Nobody cared if they cried about wanting it now. The world rewarded the ones who endured, who worked harder against their impulses. Everywhere you look in nature, the same principle applies. Salmon swim upstream to spawn. Monarch butterflies migrate thousands of miles. Trees grow roots through solid rock. Life doesn't stop to pity the struggle. Life rewards those who persist through it. Ladies and gentlemen, your excuses will not build your future. Your explanations will not feed your family. Your stories of hardship will not create your legacy. Work will. Sweat will. Relentless execution will. And the sooner you bury the hope that someone will care enough to carry you, the sooner you'll rise on the strength of your own determination. So when you wake up tomorrow and your mind whispers, I'm tired, I don't feel like it, no one understands what I'm going through, remember this, nobody cares. And that's your greatest gift. Because if nobody cares, then the responsibility, the power, the control, it all belongs to you. We've traveled through science, through stories, through the raw truths of biology and human behavior, and it all circles back to one simple, undeniable reality. Nobody cares, work harder. That isn't a slogan, it's the operating system of life. And the moment you embrace it, you stop waiting for sympathy and you start demanding more from yourself. You've heard me speak about the brain's ability to rewire, about muscles that only grow under strain, about people who faced impossible odds and won, not because the world cared, but because they cared enough to do the work. That's the pattern. That's the blueprint. Excuses will not build empires. Effort will. Complaints will not forge legacies. Sweat will. So ask yourself right now, when the lights go off in this room and you return to your life, what story will you write? Will you be the one who waits for someone to notice your struggle? Or will you be the one who turns struggle into fuel and keeps going until the results speak louder than any excuse? Nobody is coming to rescue you. Nobody is keeping score of your reasons. The world only sees what you deliver. And that's not something to fear, that's something to embrace. Because if the world doesn't care, it means you don't need permission, you don't need validation, you only need to act. You only need to outwork, outlast, out-execute. One day, your name will either be remembered or forgotten. Your children, your community, your industry, they will either inherit the excuses you perfected or the results you produced. And in that moment, you will realize the truth. Sympathy fades, but results echo. So tonight, when you go home, when you look in the mirror, when you face the 1,000 little temptations to stop, remind yourself, nobody cares. And then smile, because that means it's all on you. And you are more than capable of carrying that weight, but only if you choose to. Ladies and gentlemen, life is asking you one question every single day. Will you work harder? Answer it with your actions. Answer it with your persistence. Answer it until there is no doubt, because the world may not care about your story, but it will never be able to ignore your results. Now go out there. Stop waiting, stop explaining, stop wishing, and work harder than you ever thought possible. That is where freedom lives. That is where greatness is built, and that is where your legacy begins.